Hi everyone, it's William, bundled up. This is the Grand Duke Dmitri diary series, and yeah, it's pretty cold. It's about 9 degrees Celsius, but it's also sunny. I decided to do another one of these. Oh, I've got some schmutz on my sweater there. Sorry about that. I decided to do another one of these outside. It's been a while. Okay. So, this is 28th February, 1921. I should be able to remember that. I'm a little Ramali today, as Dmitri would say. And this is this very long diary entry that we've already done 2 or 3 videos for. And in the last session, I showed this photograph, this art photograph that was taken of Dmitri in black tie, very characteristic of the man himself, I would say. Elegant, also contemplative, and in a metaphorical sense, a dweller in the shadows, you could say, because of his introspection. And here's another one from the same series. The originals are at my now, and in this one he is indulging in his almost lifelong passion of smoking. I know he at least tried smoking when he was 14 years old. I don't know how successful he was. He wasn't allowed to smoke by his guardians until maybe he was 17. He was disappointed that he wasn't given that permission on his 16th birthday. If any of you have watched the previous 1907 diary series, then you know that. Okay, so in the last 2 videos, he was in this very unsettled mood, feeling kind of distressed because he decided that he needed to go back to Paris after quite a long stay in Copenhagen, and after meeting this delightful young woman who he really kind of fell for. I mean, he doesn't say he's in love with her, but he really wants to be with her and is conceiving of how nice it would be to lead a private life with a nice wife and family. And on the other hand, he sees himself as a fate bearer. He sees himself as someone whose fate is almost mystically tied to the fate of Russia. And so these two things don't go together. Having the quiet private life with a non-royal wife and being sort of a linchpin in Russia's fate and future. And if Russia goes down the tubes, then he's going to go down the tubes too. And if Russia flourishes, he's going to flourish. But the fate of the man and the land are tied together. And so, yeah, what to do? Well, going back to Paris means confronting some of these issues. If you recall, he had started this information bureau, he called it, which was almost a little mini spy agency, not so much spying as gathering intelligence on what was going on in Russia and what was going on in relation to Russia in other countries. And he had gotten involved with the Trepov group, who were trying to map out a future for Russia and what could be done, and sort of how the Bolshevik government could be brought down, but not so much of that as what would then come in and take over. And all of these men were monarchists, but Dmitri was very frustrated with the way things were going. And he'll be talking more about that. And he seems to have felt, whether rightly or wrongly, that he was under a lot of outside pressure when he was in Paris with these fellow monarchist emigres. And yeah, he was depressed. He was not dealing well with the stress. And this had been such a nice interval for him. The first time in a long time in Copenhagen, he'd been able to relax. He'd felt very welcome and valued. And going back to Paris, he was just dreading. So that, that sets the tone for these diary entries. We have some anger, we have definite depression, we have a little bit of an outburst using a word which I warn you is a very not nice word. And yeah, so let's dive into that. He'd just been in the video before last, he'd been talking about the ups and downs of marriage and how he would like to do that. And then in the next video, he was talking about this idea of fate. And now we are diving into, well, we're still on that topic. So let's go. And that is the most important issue, marriage. If I get married now, I can just imagine the groan that will erupt from all the Russians. And why? Only because he dared to do what he wanted, that he dared to take his own destiny in his own hands. No, I can't continue to live this way much longer. One theory keeps getting stronger in my mind, and I'll end up putting it into practice. It consists of the following. The Russians, or a great many of them, consider me a candidate for the throne. Splendid. But since these Russians make absolutely no sacrifices toward that end themselves, then why the devil should I take on the role of the orphan of Kazan? I completely understand that they want to have a candidate with a clear conscience, and that's why everyone is turning their back on Kirill, and that's the main reason why their choice has fallen on me. I have what I would call a fateful premonition that I really will do something very big in Russia, but when? And the conviction grows in me that if they, or Russia, because it's not in emigration that things will be decided, if the Russians really want me, then I will be acceptable to them, no matter what my situation is or what I do, so long as I never go against my conscience. In other words, if I were to make a huge amount of money as a movie actor or become a professional dancer, that would go against my conscience. Or if I were to marry some whore, that wouldn't be good either. But if I follow the straight path, no matter where it leads me, even if I end up as a coal miner, married or not, then I will still be worthy to lead Russia, and they will summon me, ! I have a right to a personal life and a life of freedom, and I repeat, so long as I don't go against my conscience in life, then no one can condemn me. They want me and not Kirill. Why? Okay, nice little one-word sentence there. Why? Okay, let's go back up to the top and talk about this. What is this about a groan that will erupt from all the Russians? That's how he puts it, all the Russians, from Shanghai to Canada to every corner of the globe where there are Russian refugees and Russian emigres. There will be this groan when it's announced that Grand Duke Dmitri is getting married to Marie-Louise Moltke. And why, Dmitri asks. Well, then he puts himself in their place and refers to himself in the third person, and oddly he writes this line in English because he dared to do what he wanted. He dared to take his own destiny in his own hands. So here's this sense, it's a little bit petulant, it's a little bit childish, but if we put it in the context of him being so depressed about leaving Copenhagen, then, we can cut him a little slack. We all have these moments. So because he feels under pressure, and he feels under pressure to be a model, the various members of the emigre community who are in favor of his candidacy want him to be a model for everyone to look at. This would be the ideal Russian ruler, and he doesn't feel like he can live up to that, and he feels like it would be Well, clearly he feels like it would be a little bit, that they would consider it an abandonment of his duty because he's daring to do what he wants. And in this line that's in English, he actually spells it deared twice, D-E-A-R-E-D, so I've changed that to dared. Obviously, he didn't mean deared, which isn't a word. Okay, so boy, he's really feeling the pressure, and I have no doubt that it's legitimate. Whether you think that's a silly thing or not, he was genuinely stressed out. And he tells us, not for the first time in the diary entries of January and February, that he really can't live this way anymore. He referred last time to this idea of an absurd life, a pointless life, a ridiculous life. And he feels very strongly about that. So what's he going to do? Well, he's confronting this issue, first of all, about how he's the one who's expected to sacrifice. Again, a little bit of petulance. So he talks about that in the previous paragraphs that we did in the last video, how he is sort of expected to be the sacrificial lamb. And we talked about how that was something that really contributed to Nicholas II's fate, his idea and his resignation to the idea that he was the sacrificial lamb, and that it was okay because he had this connection to this mystical connection to the Russian folk, and that didn't turn out to really be true. So there's something of that conception in Dmitri's mind, but we also hear from him that he is able to listen to his rational mind, as he puts it. But anyway, I'm diverging, or what's the word? Never mind. So, what does this mean? That they want him to be the orphan of Kazan. That's a tough one. It's something. I'll have to ask my Russian friends if they've ever heard this expression. It'll be interesting to see. It's a tough one for me to interpret it, even though I found various explanations of it online. And what I gathered is that it's some kind of hypocritical person who goes on and on about how much he's suffering, but in order to get other people's sympathy. But that doesn't make much sense. If the members of the Trepov group were trying to force Dmitri to take on the role of the orphan of Kazan, how can you? I don't know. I guess they could force him to have a public face or a public persona that would make him a hypocrite. And if that's what he means, then it's understandable that he doesn't want to do that. All right. So now a little bit about why in his how he puts it, most of, what does he say? A great many of the Russian immigrants consider him the candidate for the throne that they want to back. And why him and not Kirill? Well, because Kirill has scandalized the emigre community, or a portion of it, by his willingness to march with the revolutionaries to the Duma after Nicholas II abdicated, and to march in support very visibly of the provisional government with some kind of red ribbon on his uniform at the head of his own guards, naval troops. So that's a scandal. Dmitri, of course, also supported the provisional government and was willing to put it in writing, to swear his allegiance to them. But this, of course, was not out in the open in public like Kirill's act was. And either Dmitri has forgotten that, or, I don't know. Anyway, it's Kirill who is the one that even Dmitri himself considers a man who can no longer say that he has a clear conscience. And he tells us in this little bit, he tells us that's the main reason why their choice has fallen on me, because I am a man of clear conscience. Wow, what a statement. Or because they perceive me to be a man of clear conscience, but he's basically saying that he is. Well, I'm happy to say that human beings are contradictory, and, if this sounds like the statement of a sort of conceited and not very insightful person, then it's because he definitely knows better. And we'll go on to see that very quickly, that he's not going to make that assertion the way it sounds there. But he has had this premonition going back to the idea of fate and to having something very big to do in Russia. And he brought up this question before of when. He's approaching his 30th birthday, and that really seems to have rattled him. And in the previous diary entry, he brought up the idea of, will I be stuck in this role of creating the model exterior image for 10 years and not be able to be myself and pursue my own life? So again, he says that he has this fateful premonition that he's really going to do something very big in Russia, but when will it be? Is he willing to make the sacrifice of waiting, even if it's 10 years, or as it turned out, never? He's probably afraid of that as well. So what about this idea of doing something very big in Russia? I think he'd had it before. I don't know if he knew. He may not have, but I suspect he had heard something about it, that in 1905, when the revolution occurred, the 1905 October Revolution, Dmitri was actually, in some circles, considered the ideal candidate for the throne, that Nicholas should be forced to abdicate, as indeed he was in 1917, but that he should be forced to abdicate in 1905, and that this 13-year-old boy, Dmitri, should be put on the throne. And, that was a real current. It didn't end up, of course, obviously happening, and I don't know whether the idea was that he would have been a constitutional monarch or that he would have been an autocrat, but one who was a little more pliable. He was 13, he was handsome, and I don't know if you can say he was popular, but there were no strikes against him. And it did kind of seem like fate was teasing him a little bit. His whole life there was the possibility of the marriage to Olga, Nicholas's older daughter. There was the fact that he was sort of displayed in public by Nicholas in the way usually a ruler would display his chosen heir. For instance, in the big parade that we talked about in the 1906 diary entries, where little Dmitri was leading his guards rifle battalion in front of people like Grand Duke Nikolai Nikolaevich. Well, the Tsar's son was pretty much terminally ill, so fate was at the very least teasing him, if you believe in fate, and that was kind of unfair. But on the other hand, it is what it is in life for all of us, and so this conviction is growing in me daily. He says that they do want him, and that he will play this role in some form. And yeah, he quite rightly points out that it's not the emigration that's going to determine how things end up working out in Russia. And he says, so here we come. So I think conscience is mentioned 4 times in this little section of diary. We come to this idea of the most important thing is conscience. What Russians want is a man of clear conscience, and the most important thing for him is not to be a model, an archetype, an ideal, but to never go against his own conscience. And if he does that, then everything will work out no matter what. And he said that once before in an earlier diary entry. So it's an idea that's really settled in his mind, this whole idea of conscience and how he can live as a man of conscience. And he tells us right off the bat that there's one thing he couldn't do in good conscience. He couldn't become a movie actor. He couldn't become a professional dancer. So those are two things that apparently he contemplated. You know, what do you do if you don't really have any really have any employment history, so to speak, and you're you're a refugee and you need some kind of job that will make you a lot of money, not just, being a military instructor or something like that. Well, he'd had one offer to go to Hollywood and be a movie actor back in 1919 from an American company. And he was a very, very good dancer, despite having hated his dancing lessons when he was a kid. So why not those two things? Well, because it would go against his conscience. This was not what fate had in store for him. This was not what the Russian people expected of him. So he couldn't do that. And then here we have the unpleasant, unkind word, if I were to marry some whore. That wouldn't be good either. Well, certainly, my boy, that wouldn't be good. But amongst the various whores that he had had relationships with, i.e., I suppose he's referring to his girlfriends who were from the demi-monde, and maybe even the married women who were otherwise respectable. Well, it wouldn't be them, because he couldn't marry any of them unless they were divorced, although at least one of them had gotten divorced. But anyway, unkind way of putting it. I'm actually using a mild form of the word he uses. He's really in a state as he writes this. So here you go. Who can he marry? He can marry an unacceptable woman, let's put it that way. He can marry a respectable, a nice girl, so to speak, like Marie Louise, or he can make a dynastic marriage. So the first category is completely ruled out. And so if he doesn't do those things, if he doesn't become an actor or a dancer, if he doesn't enter a sort of semi-scandalous profession, if he doesn't marry a fallen woman, then if he keeps on the straight path, then does it really matter what he does? He can become a coal miner and still be worthy to be the Russian Tsar. I don't know where coal miner comes from, although he'd been very, very interested since 1919 on in the various strikes, especially in Britain, involving railroad workers and coal miners. And yeah, so I suppose he's right. If you believe in fate, then it doesn't matter. Actually, if you believe in fate, even if you marry a fallen woman, it should be all right. But he wouldn't be able to do that with a clear conscience. And if he's going to feel worthy, then he needs to have a clear conscience. And does he feel worthy? You may say from all of this, oh yes, of course he does, even to a somewhat irritating for us extent. He does feel worthy, but not really. So let's go on with this. Yes, he reiterates, I have a right to a personal life. There's, again, this whole idea of what the balance needs to be between a monarch and his family, who are in some ways expected to be wholly public figures, archetypal figures, models for everyone to see, even you could say the personification of the country, in exchange for the great, great privileges that are invested on and in them. They are supposed to live for the public and sacrifice their lives for the public. And we see how much damage can be done, repeatedly in Russia, with Dmitri's father even, for instance, if they decide to marry someone who doesn't isn't in keeping with the royal rules, then there's this clash between personal life and still having access to all the privileges of royalty. That comes at a cost. But anyway, of course, everybody has to have a personal life in order to be healthy. But so Dmitri has worked through this and come to the conclusion, as long as I have a clear conscience, then no one can condemn me. And he's being very emphatic about this with exclamation points and so on. They want me and not Kirill. Why? Well, he's already answered that question, because he has a clear conscience and Kirill doesn't. So why is he asking it again? Well, because he himself is not quite convinced that they are correct in their choice of him on the basis of being a man of clear conscience. So this, I can say, I'm spending an extra long time on this little snippet of the diaries, because it really goes to the heart of what I'm trying to say in my novel. And, you know, we look at these pictures and we think, or I think, what would this man say? What would the man in this picture, who's in his 40s, say if we could go into this study wherever he's at and show him this diary entry and ask him what he thinks about it? You know, would he say that I still feel that my fate is intertwined with Russia's? What would he say about his conscience? That would be interesting. But what would he say really about this idea of whether he still has that feeling of fatedness now that he is, he's past all of this. He's been married, he's divorced, his health is failing, he'll be going soon to the sanatorium. Does he still feel like his fate and Russia's are intertwined, or has he really given up on that idea and become, world weary and cynical? I don't know how to end my novel yet with respect to that, because that's a question that needs to be answered. But that's a question that Dmitri has not left us an answer to. So, it's continuing to be a journey, and let's keep that theme in mind as we go along. And thank you very much for your patience with this long video, and I hope to see you next time.